Welcome to today's webinar. This is our monthly webinar series. We cover topics related to Agile software development, and every so often we pick up a topic on core technology topics also. But today's topic is a very fundamental and core topic to Agile practice: team ownership. Team ownership is a very fundamental kind of assumption that Agile practitioners make, and this is a assumption which is the basis for successful Agile in real environments. So I'm glad to cover this topic today. But team ownership is just not something that leaders give to teams. So that's what we'll tackle today. It is something that teams have to actually take, of course, with the leader's support. Often leaders actually unknowingly end up coming in the way of this team ownership idea and end up grabbing or wresting this team ownership from the team. So in this session, Pollyanna, and I'll introduce her in a minute, she's going to cover some of the common ways that leaders end up running into this error of taking team ownership away from the team and how to avoid doing that. With that, let me introduce, before I introduce Pollyanna, let me just quickly run through some of the mechanics of today's session. It is roughly about an hour or so, and we're recording it, so those who want to revisit it will have access to it through our website, and those who missed it can, of course, watch the recorded version. We will have that available in a day or so after once the session is over. 45 minutes or so of prepared kind of a presentation that Pollyanna has, and then we'll take some questions along the way, but we'll reserve bigger questions towards the end. So we'll have another 10 to 15 minutes at the end to take more general cross-cutting questions. But you should, as the audience, feel free to send in your questions in the Q&A panel. And I'm Hemant Alhans, founder and CEO of Synerzip. I moderate a number of these webinars, so I'll keep track of these questions along the way. So let me introduce Pollyanna. Pollyanna, I'm glad that she's with us this morning, this afternoon, to cover this topic. She's a thought leader on collaborative leadership and culture transformation. So she uses her collaboration and collaborative leadership models to support organizations in creating environments that are highly productive and innovative. She also directs a think tank that works to increase collaboration and creativity, developing models of leadership for open environments. And through her work, she provides foundational theories and practices of her firm called Acceleranova. She's also co-author of two books. One of the books is The Agile Culture, Leading Through Trust and Ownership. Another book is Stand Back and Deliver, Accelerating Business Agility. So these are all related topics of Agile culture and team ownership. So with that, let me turn it over to Pollyanna to help us tackle this topic today.
Thank you, and thanks everyone for attending. I'm going to talk about the fact that we have to, how to step up and how to step back. In other words, how do we get teams to take ownership? And how do we help them do that? We'll only talk about two things: how to do it and when to do it. And the idea here is they have to step up without stifling the innovation in the teams. And you have to step back but help them still maintain the focus. What I have here on the right of your screen is what I call the leadership two-step. Don't try this at home. I made it up. It's very complicated. It's a tough place to be, and we have to figure out as leaders or as peers on teams on how we can help each other take ownership. So how do we step aside and let leaders need to? We have to unleash the talent in our organizations. It's essential to make our team successful. We have to increase our productivity because we don't always seem to have as many people as we'd like or resources we'd like. And it's not good enough anymore to just develop good solutions. It's very competitive now. We have to make great solutions. So how do we do this? My ideas are we take ownership. We help teams take ownership. And I use Alfie Cohen's book, Punished by Rewards, called, he calls it the 3 C's of motivation, and I refer to it as authentic motivation. The first one is that we need to foster collaboration in our teams. And that means teams make their own decisions. Now, in Agile, of course, teams should be deciding what they're going to be doing from the backlog in each sprint. But I think every decision should be made by the teams, and because they're closer to the edges of the organization. It turns out that research out of Stanford is showing us that people in positional power over somebody else starts making decisions based on less information. So the people closest and on the edges of our organization have more information and can make better decisions. People should choose what they want to do. They could choose what and when. That would be great. But often we don't get those choices. But people can choose how, and that is key. If they own how they're going to do and how they're going to solve the problem, they'll do it a lot better off, and they will have ownership. It's very key. The architects at IBM now are not approving designers' designs, because once they approve it, they now have ownership, and they have the how. So if the designer is moving down the pathway and sees an error, if the architect has approved it, he'll say he's failing. The designer will say, I just can't do it. The architect said it would work, so I must be doing something wrong. I just have to keep trying. But if the designer owns it himself when they find something that's not working, then they'll figure out a way to solve it and move around it, and they'll correct and pivot. Content is the final C in the 3 C's of ownership. That is to provide meaningful work. And in the software business, we don't have that problem a lot. So if we're working in software, there's a lot of interesting problems to solve. So the other thing we have to do is to create a culture of trust. It's very difficult for leaders to stand back and let teams take ownership unless there's a culture of trust that they trust them. In fact, if leaders don't trust teams, they're going to start controlling them. And we end up with a command and control culture. And in these cultures, you'll see 50% or less productivity in the teams. And we want to avoid that. So how do we step back as leaders? What's some tips we can use? First, let the teams figure out how. This is really let them figure out how. We have to stand back and let them do this. I remember a conversation one of my consultants had while he was working at IBM, where a few people were sitting around the table at the lunch hour talking about a problem and trying to solve it. And my consultant, Paul, said, well, you know, maybe you should think about it like this. Because he was so senior in the organization, everybody believed that his answer was the right answer. And they went off and tried to do it. And a few weeks later, one of them saw him in the hall and said, that's not working at all, Paul. And he said, I didn't mean that that was the right solution. I was just making a suggestion of what to look at. So we have to step back and make sure we're not doing this in very subtle ways. Create a safe place for people to fail. So we learn more from our failures than we do from our successes. But we don't want to be failing in front of our customers. So one of the things to do, especially in Agile, is to do a dry run before they're doing the demonstration before customers. And I think that's very useful for people so they can see what's going on, and that when people fail, we don't get upset about it. We just say, that's how we learn, and move on. So create a safe place for them to fail.
Hey, Pollyanna, can we take one question on the
Sure.
before you? So the question here, I think it pertained to the previous debate before the safe place is how long do you, as a leader, how long do you wait before you kind of step in or step up in your terminology? So is there a time limit on how long you let the team figure out and then you find a way to help them?
Well, actually, depends. We will talk about a tool later in the presentation on creating some boundaries or some definition of constraints, like how many people, how much budget, results. As long as the team stays within that boundary, then you leave them alone. When they start to come out or hit against the walls, then you step up. And you can step up at any time, but you don't give them any answers. And we'll talk about how that works in a minute.
Okay, all right, sounds good, thanks.
You bet. No worries. So you have to get the right people in the right seat of the bus. Oftentimes people won't take ownership because they don't have any passion around the topic, or they don't have any domain knowledge in that area, or don't feel like they can contribute. However, this means that you have to get the wrong people off the bus. People are on the teams and they won't take ownership, then you need to move them into another position. Now, a lot of times people don't want to take ownership because when they do, then they're held accountable. And they don't, some people don't want that.
Can you elaborate? Can you elaborate on this notion of right people and wrong people as a leader? How do you tell? I mean, is there kind of some guidance on that?
I always look for an intersection of three things in people: what they're passionate about doing, what they do best, and the organizational fit, where they fit in our organization. So where those three things intersect, that's what I mean is then we have people that are really happy and enjoying their work.
Okay.
So if you have somebody with any of those circles that are not intersecting, then you probably have some frustrated people in your teams. So you have to move them around in positions to make sure those three things intersect, and then you go from there. And then they will be operating, and then they will be most likely wanting to take ownership. But as I mentioned, there are some people that don't want to take ownership. In Agile, we see about 20 to 30% of the people don't want to do Agile. There's nothing wrong with this. There's a lot of jobs for those people to do. There's a lot of other positions for them. But we do find that that's the case. And it's the same way with ownership. I find it a little less, maybe more like 20%. It seems like people are just waiting for the opportunity to be able to solve problems themselves and figure it out by themselves, because that's what people like to do. And then especially when we give them valuable problems to solve that meet real customer needs, and then they're very excited. But we have to take them off the bus because they will be a drag on the teams and the organization. So, but we talked about how to step back, but what happens if your project starts to go like this and ends up off the cliff? So, when should you step up, and how are you going to do that? So, how do you know your team is struggling? I usually ask this in my classes, and if you think about it, you'll be able to come up with some ways. 93% of our emotions are communicated through body language. So if we are watching our teams or get them on Skype or webinar, webcams or something, to watch them in meetings and in workplaces, or even just watch them in the cafeteria, you'll see that you can see that they're struggling. You'll see a slowdown in productivity. You'll see them not being happy and not too excited, and fun is taken out of the organization. You'll see people coming in late and going home early. You can tell by watching a team, especially if you start thinking about you, when you know you're struggling, what does that look like to you? So once we know a team is struggling, what are we going to do about it? So we have to get them back on track to where they're going, but we have to maintain their team integrity as a team, and most important, their ability to solve the problems. In other words, we don't want to take back their ownership. Don't want to do that. It's not what we want to do. So how are we going to do this? Now, I wouldn't ask what's wrong, because I found when I ask what's wrong, then I get everything or I get nothing. So I'm not so happy about this question. And I don't ask them where they're stuck. A lot of people don't want to admit it. So I don't ask them that kind of question either. So I ask the team to describe their work and the approach that they took and the pathway that they went down, and most important, why they took that pathway. What was it that they saw they wanted to take that? So what I'm trying to do is help them discover a new view of the problem without giving them the answer. So one thing that we can do is use what we call a zero gravity thinker. And this is a person who doesn't know anything about the problem these people are solving. I mean zero, nothing. And they come together with the team and they ask the team to walk through like a customer user or how a user would use the problem and walk through step by step what happens in the system. And the zero gravity thinker can ask all sorts of stupid questions because they know nothing. And oftentimes they'll ask a question. It may not be, the team may know the answer, but a lot of times these zero gravity thinkers can help us see the problem in a different way. But remember that a zero gravity thinker cannot be a leader or a manager for these teams. They need to be completely separate from them. But they can be very, very valuable in helping the team look at what they want to look at.
So can you take an example, illustrate the zero gravity thinker from maybe one of the situations you've had, Pollyanna?
Well, one of the situations I had was that they were building a system in our technology department to read, to load and unload electronic benefit transfer cards for people on food stamps.
Okay.
So it makes them, we don't need food stamps anymore, paper anymore. And they had to touch 20 systems inside the bank to build this system. And they were walking, and they got stuck in one place. And so I said, okay, so let's talk about what happens. Let's talk about loading the card. And they say, okay, they go to the store and swipe their card. I said, okay, then what happens? How do you read? Well, how does it get from there to us? And so step by step, we would walk through. I said, then you get that card information, and what do you want to do with it? How do you know that they're qualified to get their money? How do you know it's time for them to get their money? How do you know how much they're going to get? So I can ask all of these, questions that I'm sure they thought about, but, maybe they didn't. So and just getting them to walk through the whole system, how it would work. Does that make sense?
Yeah, makes sense. Thanks.
Yeah. You bet. So how do we step up? First of all is that you cannot take back ownership from your teams once they start to take it. Once you do, it's really hard to get back their trust in you. They think, yeah, you told me I had ownership, you helped me take it, and then you took it away. It's not really working out for me. So it's very, very difficult when that happens. Serious groveling for the people on your team will be required to begin the process of repairing the taking back ownership. And the way we do it, the easiest way, is don't give the answers. If someone walks into your office or leans over to you and says, how do I solve this? Or I can't figure this out, or blah, 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 and you say, have you tried this? You have now given them the answer, and you have the ownership, and you've taken it away from them, especially if you're in any positional power. Leaders have to remember, or SMEs have to remember, subject matter experts have to remember that they have weighted their statements are weighted, and people think they are right or have more credibility or they're smarter than other people. So you have to be very careful you don't give the answers or give anybody the solution. It's just not possible. You have to help keep the focus on the problem. You can tell stories or experiences. Now, one of my favorite stories is when we were building the electronic stock exchange for the Swiss banks. And the Matcher team, Jochen was one of my best developers. He was a delightful developer. And I was walking around the floor, which I did a lot with the teams, and saw him focusing extra hard on his computer. And his body language was not too relaxed. And I said, Jochen, how's it going? And he said, fine. And he wouldn't look up at me. Well, there are 15 different definitions of fine in this world, and that's not one of the good ones when he said it. So I said, what's up? And he said, yesterday I could match one buy with one sell. And today I can't do anything. Nothing's working. I said, wow. I said, well, I don't know what you're doing, what your language you're using, but way back in my days of writing code, yes, I did write code in the past, is that sometimes I'd pass an integer over to a real, and there was no boundary checking, no type checking and stuff, and I'd collect some noise, and he goes, oh, I think I figured it out. And the next day he was the happy guy. So I always tell my failure stories more than my successful stories, because I think it helps people realize that everybody makes mistakes and everybody struggles. So I like to make it kind of real there. I ask questions all the time without giving the answers. That will help the team discover solutions. I don't ask questions that has the solution in it or hidden in it. So my favorite question is, how would you like to solve it? And my business partner's question is, what would you like me to do? So other good questions are, why did you pick that option? Did you consider other options? Who have you discussed this with? What other team members are you working with?
So,
Do
Pollyanna,
you
what
know
about
of
the
anyone that
related,
might be able to help you in the organization?
what
It is
about the
very,
related,
very important. Pardon?
yeah, what about the related technique of a leader rolling up their sleeves and joining the team to help solve this problem? Is that a good idea?
No, because the leader has more, has bigger, has more status or credibility, or I'm not sure what you would call it, more influence. So we did a control system for electrical power plants for the whole city of Graz in Austria. These are big control systems, and when some part of the system or the town loses power, then it balances the power to backfill for them. And we were building this test for the factory acceptance test, and we were 2 weeks away from the factory acceptance test, which takes 5 days. And I walked into the lab, and I looked around, and I thought to myself, they have to do this, and they have to do this, and they have to do this. And I thought to myself, if I take over and tell them what to do, they might not fail, but then I have taken away their success as well. And if they do fail, they haven't learned from it either. So I turned around, walked out of the lab, and didn't go back in. And when we ran the factory acceptance test, they ran it in 4 days, completely accepted. So if we as leaders start digging in and telling people the solution, we have taken ownership away from them. We have taken the opportunity for them to succeed. We have taken away the opportunity for them to fail and learn from that failure. And besides that, I don't know. Some leaders, do they really think they know the answer? Are they that close to the technology? Are they getting old? Are they moving on? I built a stock exchange for the Swiss banks 28 years ago, and by then I was technically dead. I couldn't write code, whatever they were doing to save my life. So we have to be very careful. Why do we think we know better than they do? We have to let them learn, let them struggle, and let them own it. Make sense?
Yep, makes sense. Thanks.
This is very difficult. I'm not saying it's easy, but I saw it happen. When it starts to happen, you see productivity going very, very high in organizations. So in one organization, the pilot project for Agile they did was 22 Scrum teams. And they said, that's really going to be your pilot project? They said, yep. I said, okay. I said, good luck, Pollyanna. You're our Agile consultant. I said, okay, let's see what we can do. In 3 months of putting ownership into the teams and helping the teams take ownership, in 3 months, they cut their number of defects going out into the field by 50%. And they cut their delivery time. Their delivery time used to take 2 years, and now it's taking 1 year. That's because the teams took ownership. In fact, they had so much ownership that when the product owners came for figuring out the second 3-month release cycle, they came with only ideas and no business value attached to them, the what and the why. They had the what, but not the why. And the team said, we're not taking it until we have the what and the why. So they had total ownership, and they're just cruising along. So you can really see that it makes a big difference. The leaders, the leaders stood way high. People would come down and say, we need you in this meeting. And they'd say, who's in there? And they'd say, these 2 people. And they say, that's what you need. You don't need me. They have the answers. They're the ones closer to the problem, closer to the teams than I am. So that's amazing to watch. And people start stepping up. So one guy said to me as I was walking down the hall, I said, I've gotten more work done the last 3 months than I have the whole time I've been here in this company. And I said, how long is that? And he said, 3.5 years. So ownership really helps people step up and do what they think is right and do what they do is best. All right? So a macro leadership tool is a way for us to help figure out when we should step up and when we should step back. So it looks like this. There's a market window, which is our time frame we want to deliver. We have a budget. We have a certain number of people. We have a purpose for the project. We have some considerations and risks we have to take into account, and we have results. Now, results have to be quantifiable. It has to be measurable. It's very, very important. As long as the team, you build this cube with the team, not build it and tell them this is it. You build it with them to make sure that they understand all the sides of the cube. You don't have to have 6, you can have 8, you can have less, but you have to have results that are quantifiable. As long as the team works within the cube, then you stand back and remove barriers for them whenever they need them removed. And you stand back further and further while they're in the cube. But when they start bouncing against the edge of the cube and come out of the cube, or come out of the cube, that's when you have to step up. Sometimes we make tighter boundaries. So let me give you an example of when a team started to step out of the cube. My business partner, Neil, worked for a company that put chemicals on coal to reduce the coal emissions when they're burning it. And they had 26 plants where they did this all over the United States. And it turned out, they found out that if I could get all of these plants online to the internet, by the end of the year, they could have a tax break of some kind. So some guy volunteers to do the 26. The market window is the end of the year. The results are all 26, and they don't care how they get online, just so long as the plant manager is happy with the solution. He has a certain number of people, he has a budget, and he has a purpose, and it's measurable results. So they're getting down near the end of the year, and Neil says to the leader of the project, "So how are things going?" And he says, "Great, I only have one more plant to get online, and phone company, AT&T, the phone company, is coming out to the plant on December 26th. Neil thought to himself, I thought to myself when I heard this story, how reliable is our phone company on the day after Christmas? What's going to happen there? So Neil says to him quietly, "So, do you have a backup plan?" And he says, "Well, I don't need a backup plan. They'll be there on the 26th. He said, "Well, do you have a backup plan?" And the guy went off and started thinking about it. He said, "Just in case he doesn't show up, do you have a backup plan?" So he came up with a backup plan. He found a trailer, rented a satellite dish, and if the phone company didn't come, he was going to drive the trailer out to the plant, hook up the satellite. So that's how it works. Neil did not give him the solution, just asked him a question, because he could see he might be coming out of the box and not make the due date. So that's how this cube helps us. We can also use it for leading up, talking to our leaders to say, "Hey, let me do my job. Is this what my constraints are? And as long as I'm operating in here, it's just I'll just keep letting you know how it's going," and then you step back. So the secret here is we have to find a tipping point between these two places, when to step up and when to step back. And it's our decision to find that out, and it's very careful. So in summary, step back, you have to use authentic motivation, the 3 C's, which are collaboration, making all the decisions inside the team, choice, choosing what you want to do and when you want to do it by, if we have that choice. It's sprints, let us do a lot of that, and content, having interesting work to do. We need to foster trust, and we have to let the team find the solutions. Now, it's very tempting when leaders see teams struggling to step in and rescue them. However, there are a lot of people that get the idea that, especially if people are rated in independent performance reviews for solving problems. So sometimes on teams you'll see people withhold information, and then the team will start struggling, and then they'll swoop in with their information and rescue the team, and then they succeed. And what happens? Our organization rewards this person as a hero when they've really done some bad stuff for the team. So you have to be very careful that we don't do things like rescuing the team. You have to ask questions. We can't give them solutions. Once a leader gives the team one solution, teams will give up. They won't try hard. They'll say, I'm not going to try and figure this out. I'll just walk down the hallway and Pollyanna will tell me this solution. So you're really limiting their productivity by trying to give them the answers. So stepping up, you've got to keep the focus on ownership. So every time you say something to your teams, ask yourself the question, is this a possibility that it could take away ownership? There are very subtle ways we can do this, and recently I thought of one, that when a team succeeds, the leaders go out and get some pizza and Cokes or pizza and beer and brings it back and say, okay, let's celebrate. Now, they've already taken away ownership from the team because they didn't ask them how they'd like to celebrate. It's very subtle, but we have to be careful. When you help teams take ownership, you have to be all in. That's how it works.
So what would be the alternative you would suggest in that example of pizza and beer?
You ask the team how? Yeah, I just ask the team. That's my favorite statement. People ask me something or say, what do we do about this situation? Ask the team what they want to do. Ask the team what they want to do for their celebration. How do they want to celebrate it? Oftentimes they'll come back with better ideas than we do. So one day, Neil was this CIO of this coal company, and his CEO, his boss, comes down to him on Friday and says, Neil, you have to cut $5 million out of your budget and still deliver the same results, the same services you're doing today. So Neil goes home and he spends a weekend coming up with new ideas and trying to figure out how he's going to do this. And sometime on Sunday, he's kind of woke up and said, wait a minute, what would Pollyanna do? She would ask the team. So he goes in on Monday and asks the team. They came up with better ideas. And because they came up with them, they implemented them almost immediately because they owned them. And that's how it works. So if he'd come in and said, we got to do this, this, and this, he would have taken ownership away from the team.
Okay.
Right? We have to keep focusing through questions, not answers. And we need to use the macro leadership cube to know when to leave the team alone and when they start bouncing against the edge and when they need to, or when they bounce out, and when we can step up and help them. Help them by asking questions, not giving them an answer. So here are the two books. Both of these books are about tools, are proven tools. This is not theory. These are tools we have used again and again and again to help you with building a culture of trust, ownership, business alignment, dealing with uncertainty, collaborating with non-collaborators, and leading collaborations. So, any questions?
So there are a few questions we have here, but I'm going to reserve these questions to come back at the end. So once you are done with the presentation, Pollyanna will start taking the general questions. But
Okay, so Here's my information if anybody needs it. And here's some recommendation of books that I like. And here is over to Hermat.
Okay, great. Thanks, Pollyanna, covering this topic in a wonderful way. So before we go to questions, let me just prompt the audience. There are a number of questions we already have in a backlog, but I think it'll be good if you guys keep sending your questions while you're doing that. Let me just take 30 seconds and introduce Synergip. We organize these monthly webinars. So Pollyanna, if you can go to the next page so I can talk a little bit about Synergip. So we are a software development, product development partner for typically small to mid-size venture-backed growth stage software companies. And for each company, we put together a dedicated team of software professionals, which seamlessly extends our client's in-house team and starts delivering following Agile practices. We feel Agile is a great way to build quality software. It actually reduces the risk of outcomes. And we also are able to reduce the cost by using our dual shore team, which is we have a development center in India, and we are able to consistently offer 50% cost advantage to our clients. And in addition to that, offer long-term flexibility, which is at any point in their association with us, if they feel like they need to convert the team into a captive team, we facilitate that option also. So that way our clients can start with us and then convert the team to their in-house team, and that's all good. So that's Synergip in a nutshell. And the next page, if you advance, Pollyanna, just shows a glimpse of some of our clients. So you may recognize a few, but the general idea across the board, many industries and many technologies, but all small to mid-size. A few large clients thrown in here, but typically small to mid-size venture-backed growth stage companies are a sweet spot for our clients. So with that, let's kind of come and start taking some questions. So we have a number of them. So I'll just go. I won't overly order them. So let's take the first question, Pollyanna. So one of the topics that comes up in Agile is this related notion of self-managing team. So self-managing team, is that exactly same as the concept of team ownership, or is there any kind of a distinction in these two related notions?
No, I think, in my opinion, they're the same. Self-managing and having the ownership to self-manage is the key. So it's all about picking what you want to do, when you want to do it, and how you want to do it. That's self-organizing, self-managing. That's what I mean.
Great, thanks. So let's take another one, which is, the question is, where do education and mentoring come in? The team does not always know what the possibilities are. So can you talk a little bit about the role of education and mentoring on behalf of leaders?
Yeah, the architects at IBM, when they stopped approving the design of the designers, that didn't mean they stopped mentoring or discussing them. They'd have they were just having office hours all the time. Designers could come in and they would ask questions about, why did you pick this one, or where do you think that will get, that is needed, questions like that, without giving them answers. Mentoring, to me, the way we do mentoring, the best way to do mentoring is in pair programming. In fact, I've even seen it in an architecture firm with the drafters, is that the drafters started pair drafting with one experienced drafter and one novice drafter. I thought that was fascinating to see that evolve. So pair programming, or working together in pairs, is a great way for mentoring, because they can see it happen, not be told what happens. The other thing that's essential to me is that coaching is done on how we think, not our domain knowledge. So if we can help people think differently, or see a different way, or process information differently, that's real mentoring and coaching, in my opinion. So that's how it helps. Education, is very important. Lunch and learns are important. Conferences, all of those things are important. But the leaders have to step back and let the teams learn.
So let's take another question. What's the distinction between standing back and then completely being aloof for a leader who's completely not even involved? I mean, is there anything wrong with that extent of interpretation of standing back, or is there how do leaders strike the right balance for their team?
Yeah, that's a very good question. But leaders don't step back all the way. When I worked in the stock exchange, there were 120 people. They were all, they were on, I think, 2 floors, big open spaces. I walked the halls all the time and talked to people all the time and found out what was going on and what was happening. And watching the release burn up, and sitting in on check-in sessions, or being present so people understood that I was there and that I heard what was going on. And I always use the question, help me understand what you're doing there. Help me understand this direction you're going in. That's another good question to ask. But you can't, if you step back too far, I mean, if you're not watching what's going on, it's what I call taking the pulse of the teams. Is you have to take the pulse, you have to watch. So when they start to struggle, you can ask some questions to help them get back on track and solve the problem themselves. Leaders, there's a lot of confusion in the Agile world about, especially the self-managed, self-organized team. Leaders usually come out of the Agile classes and say, okay, I'm an Agile leader now, I don't do anything. Or they come out and say, I'm an Agile leader, I got to tell them everything. And it's not there, it's in the middle. You have to be there, you have to coach, you have to mentor, you have to support, show your support. You have to be interested in what their success, find out their success. And I always do it by asking interesting questions about the person, such as, one of my favorites is, what is a major turning point in your life? Questions about the person so I can get to know them as individuals. And I want to be seen as accessible. I want to be there. All the teams can't solve they're getting the right people in the right seat on the bus. Maybe I need to help them move somebody off the bus and on another bus. So, there's lots of things to be doing. Looking for new strategies, looking for new, helping people understand processes. There's a lot of work in being a leader. But the transition is very hard. We come up through organizations by solving problems. When you get to be a leader, you have to stop solving problems and help other people solve problems. And when I first made the transition, I'd go home at night and go, I didn't do anything today. I did nothing. No, nothing. Built nothing. Solved no problem. And then I thought, after a few days of that, I realized how many people I had helped solve the problems, their problems, and help them and help them solve them themselves, not by fixing it for them, but by standing back, letting them take over, step up. So
would you help extend this thought process for those leadership situations where the process of walking around and asking questions and keeping the pulse, but where the teams are remote or out of sight, out of mind, which often happens in software development, like in our client situations where the teams are in their time zone and distance away, while the leader is maybe here on the US side?
Yeah, what I do is use a lot of webcams and Skype and Google Hangouts to watch people and see how they're doing. I've also learned over the years to be very mindful of people's emails.
Mm-hmm.
And also I find people, I go on site for a while, find people that are very excited and very passionate about what they're doing, and use them to take the pulse of the organization for me. And that's really important. And then I check in with those people all the time.
Let's take another related question, a little harsh, but let's take it anyways. What if your leaders are fully inept and are biggest part of the problem? You find that?
Well, this is nothing new. It's happened before.
Right.
It's going to happen again.
Yeah.
The best you can do is build an, protect your organization. So I had to do it at the stock exchange because I was the vice president, and the president above me it had failed twice before I got there. And he ran a fear-based organization. We had an office called the Departure Lounge, which meant if anybody brought bad news to this president, they were in the Departure Lounge, and within 3 months they were no longer in the company.
Mm-hmm.
I realized that we would never build a huge stock exchange in a fear-based organization. So I managed up. He did his paperwork every Sunday afternoon, just about, and every Sunday afternoon I was in the office and I'd tell him what was going on and what was happening and how much progress we were making.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was a very interesting. I had a good leader and architect who then led inward for me and helped me with the other team leaders and worked with them. So, and I protected the team from this president and created a trust-based organization beneath me.
Okay.
So that's how it works.
Yeah, so let's take a slight variation of what you were just describing, what you did in that situation. And the question is that what if I am not the leader but on the team, what recommendations do you have for the team to get the manager to step back and not provide solutions? So what can a team member do to make this happen?
The team member, the best thing they can do is sit down with them and say, use the macro leadership cube to sit down with your manager and say, hey, can we talk about, and make sure we understand what we're supposed to deliver and what our constraints are. And if we can agree on all these, then we'd like you to step back a little or give us a little room to make some of these things happen, because we think that we'll be doing, we can have a little more time if we have this cube that we can work in. We have a little more time, maybe do some innovation and be a little bit more productive, and we'll come to you when we need help. One time I had somebody just explain to their boss that they felt like they weren't valued and weren't doing a good job because they were being micromanaged. And he said, I didn't have that intention at all. I'm really sorry. And he stopped doing it. Sometimes leaders don't know what they're doing. The third option is just put the book, The Agile Culture, on their desk someday.
Okay. Okay, let's another question here. So this is a question saying, they're asking, please comment on whether you consider ownership to be an all or nothing, black and white phenomena, or whether it is possible to have shared or partial ownership, which is in between full ownership and no ownership.
It's kind of like, to me, like I trust somebody 50%. That's it. It's that kind of thing. I don't believe it. you have 50% of the ownership. It's kind of like somebody wrote to me the other day and said, okay, we have one story. It's 50% done, 50% done, fully tested. Can we call it as, can we count those points in the sprint? No. You can't have 50% trust. I sort of trust you. You can't say, I sort of give you ownership. You have to give, and actually, it's very fascinating because when you give people, when you trust people and you give them ownership, they are so respectful and pleased to have that responsibility. They don't take advantage of it.
That's
Rarely do you see that, and that's usually a person that didn't want to take ownership in the first place, and they're the wrong seat on the bus. You need to be off the bus.
Right.
But most people, it's very interesting, as people say, people want to add value, they want to do good work. They just want the opportunity to contribute and show their value. And so when you give them ownership to find the solution themselves, and then you say, by when do you want to have it done? They just go, bang. They'll work really hard to reach that goal. But if you sit there and tell them, I want it done like this on this day, then I don't have any investment in it, and I don't really care, So ownership's 100%.
So is it a lot like parenting? So your macro leadership model sounds like giving sort of boundary conditions and then letting them perform in that.
Yeah, I don't give them the boundaries. We make those together.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
We
how is it
discuss
different
that.
from parenting? So this model of leadership is a way for us parents out there, how would you differentiate what are some common themes from good parenting versus good leader?
Well, the common themes are, how do we give people ownership? Just letting people take ownership and letting people fail, finding a safe place for them to fail. A lot of parents, parenting is different for a lot of different people. So is leadership. But I find that the transition between management and leadership is very difficult, and it's very different. Managers are solving problems and dealing with tasks. Leaders are helping other people solve problems, and they're leading and they're dealing with the culture, changing the culture to trust and ownership. And the mindset. The mindset is, you are valuable to our organization. We need you, and here's why. So parents do the same thing, as you are valuable to the world, but you figure out how you want to do that, how you're going to contribute to the world. But so I don't know. It's easy, however, in the parent-child model to slip into command and control, because we do that a lot with kids.
Right.
There's certain places we tell them what to do, and there's certain places where we stand back and let them fail.
Let's take one more question, and while we're doing that, could you advance the page which is showing to a final page which talks about the next webinar? Yeah. So and while this is so for all the audience, this is our next webinar coming up next month. It's applying lean startup principles to agile projects. But before I wrap up this one, let's take one final question since we have another couple of minutes. You touched on this in the beginning part of this conversation, Q&A conversation, Pollyanna, on hiring, and this touches on the right people in the right seats and also. Any advice on the hiring filter? What kind of to get the people who have the willingness to take ownership to come on board? So any advice to what to look for while hiring?
Yeah, DHawk came up with the idea. DHawk developed the Visa International system, credit card system, the only it's the second self-modifying system in the world besides the internet. He said you need to hire people based on, first on integrity, second on motivation, third on capacity, fourth on knowledge, fifth on experience. I think there's one more in there, but most people do it the bottom up, and that's not a good idea because it doesn't quite work out. But if you don't have integrity, then you can't trust people's motivation. And capacity means the ability to learn, and so that's what we want to make happen. We want to help people learn.
Excellent.
And so if you interview for those, I have questions for the first 4 of the questions you can ask in an interview. So if anybody wants to reach out to me and ask me for those questions, I'd be happy to send them to you.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Pollyanna, for covering this topic, and I'm glad we had ample time for exploring through the Q&A session.
Great.
Also, this turned out very well. I really appreciate it, and thanks everybody who attended. Stay tuned for our next webinar next month.
Thank you.
Thanks, Pollyanna, again. Bye-bye.
Yeah, bye-bye.